Slam her against the wall. I said don't let her move. Deputy Landon roared, his heavy boots kicking Nadia's legs apart as the cold steel of the handcuffs dug violently into her wrists. Nadia Fleetwood didn't flinch. Her eyes, cold and dark as a starless night, bypassed the furious cop entirely and locked onto the sleek, titanium briefcase he had just illegally confiscated from her truck. A single red LED light on the case's lock had just blinked to life. "Deputy," Nadia whispered, her voice slicing through the precinct's chaos with absolute, terrifying authority. "You just triggered a level 8 national security breach. You don't need a lawyer. You need a priest." Oakhaven was the kind of affluent, meticulously sanitized town where the autumn leaves seemed to fall only on designated municipal sweeping days. The air smelled of overpriced artisanal coffee and entitlement. It was a place designed to keep the world's ugliness firmly beyond its gated borders. General Nadia Fleetwood, newly appointed director of the Pentagon's Domestic Strategic Defense Command, had chosen Oakhaven for precisely that reason. After 3 decades of wading through the blood-soaked geopolitical mud of foreign war zones, she craved a sterile, quiet existence for her weekends. On this particular Saturday afternoon, Nadia was wearing faded denim coveralls, a grease-stained white t-shirt, and a battered Washington Nationals baseball cap. Her hands, which had signed orders moving aircraft carriers across oceans just 36 hours prior, were currently slick with 10W30 motor oil. She stood beneath the sprawling awning of Hannah's Oasis, the only independent gas station left on the outskirts of Oakhaven. She had just purchased a gorgeous, dilapidated 1969 Ford F-100 pickup truck from a farm 2 counties over. Restoring it was supposed to be her therapy, a mechanical puzzle she could solve with a wrench instead of a drone strike. Hannah, the station owner, was a sharply dressed woman in her late 30s who had inherited the property and stubbornly refused to sell it to developers. She leaned against the doorframe of the convenience store, watching Nadia check the dipstick. "You're brave, taking that rust bucket onto the interstate," Hannah called out, a friendly, genuine smile on her face. "Looks like it needs a prayer more than it needs premium unleaded." Nadia wiped her hands on a rag, returning the smile. It was a rare, genuine expression that softened the hard, tactical lines of her face. "She's got good bones. Just needs someone who knows how to listen to her engine. I'm Nadia, by the way." "Hannah," she replied. "If you need a tow, my brother-in-law runs a shop down the caption." Hannah's words died in her throat. The warm atmosphere evaporated instantly as a black and white Oakhaven police cruiser swerved sharply off the main road, its tires screeching against the pavement. The cruiser angled aggressively, blocking the vintage Ford from exiting the pump station. Deputy Landon killed the engine but left the flashing light bar on, casting an aggressive red and blue glare over the sunlit gas station. Landon was a thick-necked, red-faced man whose uniform strained at the buttons. He was a man who operated entirely on the adrenaline of perceived superiority, utilizing his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a weapon against his own deep-seated insecurities. In the passenger seat sat Soren, a 24-year-old rookie. Unlike Landon, Soren sat with a rigid, almost military posture. He had served a tour as military police in Kandahar before taking this civilian job, and the instincts hadn't faded. He looked at the scene, confused as to why his training officer was initiating a high-risk stop on a vintage truck at a gas station. Landon kicked his door open, his hand instantly dropping to rest on the butt of his sidearm. It was a textbook escalation tactic. "Step away from the vehicle." Landon barked, his voice echoing loudly off the metal canopy above them. Nadia slowly laid the oily rag on the hood of the truck. Her heart rate didn't elevate. Her breathing remained deep and measured. She analyzed the threat matrix instantly. Aggressive posture, hand-on weapon, unjustified escalation. "Local law enforcement. Is there a problem, officer?" Nadia asked. Her voice was calm, carrying a deep, resonant timbre that usually brought 4-star generals to silence in Pentagon briefing rooms. "I said step away from the damn truck," Landon yelled, marching forward, closing the distance to assert physical dominance. "We have a report of a stolen 1960s Ford pickup out of Miller County. You match the description of the suspect." Hannah stepped forward, frowning. Landon, what are you doing? She just paid for gas. She's not bothering anyone. Stay out of this, Hannah. Landon snapped, not taking his eyes off Nadia. He sneered, taking in her grease-stained coveralls and dark skin. To him, the narrative was already written in stone. She didn't look like she belonged in Oak Haven. Therefore, she was a criminal. Hands where I can see them. ID, now. Nadia kept her hands perfectly still, resting them on the front quarter panel of the truck. My identification is in my wallet, which is located in the cab of the truck. If I reach for it, you will perceive it as a threat, given your current agitated state and improper hand placement on your firearm. Landon blinked, momentarily thrown off by the clinical, hyper-articulate response. It wasn't the panic or the defensive anger he was used to. It was an assessment, and it made him furious. Don't you psychoanalyze me, lady, Landon growled, stepping within striking distance. Soren, get over here and secure the suspect. Soren jogged over, his eyes darting between Landon and Nadia. As Soren got closer, he noticed something Landon didn't. He noticed how Nadia stood feet shoulder-width apart, weight perfectly balanced, eyes tracking both of their center masses. It was a combat stance, masked as relaxation. Landon, sir, the stolen vehicle report from Miller County was for a blue Chevy, not a red Ford, Soren whispered, trying to de-escalate his superior. I don't care what the make is, rookie. They change plates, they paint them. I know a thief when I see one, Landon hissed. He lunged past Nadia, shoving her shoulder roughly to get to the open window of the truck cab. I'm searching the vehicle for the ID. Nadia's arm shot out, her grip locking onto Landon's wrist like a titanium vice. She didn't twist or strike. She simply stopped his forward momentum with an immovable, shocking display of kinetic force. Under the Fourth Amendment, you do not have probable cause to search my vehicle, Nadia stated, her voice dropping to a low, glacial register. And you will not lay your hands on me again. Landon's face turned purple. The sheer humiliation of being physically stopped by a woman in front of a rookie and a local business owner shattered his fragile ego. He yanked his arm back and drew his taser, pointing the twin laser sights directly at Nadia's chest. Resisting arrest. Assaulting an officer. Landon screamed, spit flying from his lips. Turn around and put your hands on your head. Now, Nadia looked at the taser. She calculated the voltage, the risk to her own nervous system, and the sheer geopolitical nightmare that would unfold if she hospitalized 2 local cops on a Saturday. She chose the path of least physical resistance, knowing she held a tactical nuclear option in her back pocket. Slowly, deliberately, she turned around and placed her hands behind her back. You are making a catastrophic error in judgment, deputy, Nadia said softly as Landon violently slapped the cuffs onto her wrists, tightening them until the metal bit into her skin. Shut up, Landon sneered, hauling her back toward the cruiser. Soren, search the cab, find the ID, and find whatever else she's hiding in this junk heap. Wait. Nadia's voice cracked like a whip, freezing Soren in his tracks. Her cold demeanor vanished, replaced by an urgent, lethal intensity. Officer Soren, do not touch the titanium briefcase on the passenger seat. It is a classified government asset. If you tamper with it, you will trigger a localized security protocol. Landon laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He shoved Nadia into the back of the cruiser. A classified asset? Right. And I'm the King of England. Soren, grab the case. Let's see how many kilos of product our secret agent is hauling. The Oak Haven Police Precinct was a monument to small-town nepotism, operating out of a newly renovated brick building funded by wealthy taxpayers who expected the police to serve as a private security firm. When Landon dragged Nadia through the double glass doors, the lobby was unusually crowded. Mayor Anastasia Thorne, a polished, cutthroat politician who wielded the police department like a political prop, was standing near the dispatcher's desk. She was flanked by a photographer from the Oak Haven Tribune, posing for a piece on law and order in the suburbs. Anastasia's perfect smile faltered as Landon shoved a handcuffed, grease-stained black woman into the lobby, followed closely by a pale, sweating Soren carrying a heavy, sleek titanium briefcase. Landon, what is the meaning of this? Anastasia demanded, stepping away from the camera flashes. Her eyes darted nervously to the reporter. We are in the middle of a press event. Got a live one. Mayor, Landon puffed out his chest, desperate to play the hero for the cameras. He shoved Nadia toward the booking counter. Jolene, the dispatcher, popped a bubble of pink gum and lazily rolled her chair over to the keyboard. Suspect was driving a suspected stolen vehicle, assaulted me during the investigation, and wait until you see what she had in the truck. Landon snatched the titanium briefcase from Soren's hands and slammed it onto the booking counter. The dull metal chimed heavily against the wood. Nadia stood tall, completely ignoring the handcuffs biting into her flesh. She looked at the mayor, her gaze piercing through the woman's political veneer. Mayor Thorne, I presume, I strongly advise you to order your deputy to step away from that case. He lacks the security clearance to be within 10 feet of it. Anastasia looked at Nadia, taking in her calm, unbothered posture. Most people brought in cuffs were screaming, crying, or begging. This woman looked like she was inspecting troops. It made Anastasia deeply uneasy. Who are you? Anastasia asked, narrowing her eyes. My name is Nadia Fleetwood. I work for the Department of Defense. Landon scoffed loudly, slapping the top of the briefcase. She's a liar, Chief. She's a cartel mule. Look at this thing. It's solid metal, no keyhole, just this weird glass scanner on the handle. It's drug money. I guarantee it. Landon, maybe we should run her prints first, Soren interjected, his voice tight. He was staring at the briefcase. During his time in Afghanistan, he had seen cases like this carried by CIA SAD operatives. The lack of seams, the weight, the biometric pad, this wasn't cartel gear. This was DARPA-level hardware. Sir, if she really is DOD, you shut your mouth, rookie, Landon roared. He turned to Jolene. Hand me the pry bar from the evidence locker. If she won't open it, I will. We need to log the evidence for the felony charge. Do not touch that case, Nadia said. Her voice wasn't a yell. It was a promise of total destruction. That is a Project Vanguard Tier 1 biometric vault. It contains localized launch codes and strategic defense algorithms. If it registers an unauthorized forced entry, it will execute a broken shield lockdown. The precinct went dead silent. The reporter from the Tribune stopped taking pictures. Anastasia's face drained of color. A what? Anastasia stammered. Landon laughed, though it sounded slightly hysterical. Launch codes? In a pickup truck? She's out of her mind. She's high on her own supply. Ignoring the mayor, ignoring Soren's frantic warnings, Landon grabbed a heavy steel flashlight from his duty belt. I'll show you what's in here. Landon, no. Soren yelled, lunging forward. But it was too late. Landon brought the heavy end of the flashlight down in a vicious, sweeping arc, smashing it directly into the biometric glass scanner on the handle of the briefcase. The glass didn't shatter. It splintered into a web of glowing, angry red lines. Instantly, a sound unlike anything anyone in the room had ever heard pierced the air. It wasn't an alarm. It was a high-frequency, bone-rattling mechanical whine that made Jolene clap her hands over her ears and scream. The single red LED light on the face of the briefcase began to pulse with the rhythm of a frantic heartbeat. Blink, blink, blink. Then, all the lights in the precinct flickered and died. The building plunged into emergency darkness, bathed only in the pulsing crimson light of the briefcase and the battery-operated exit signs. The electronic deadbolts on the front doors and the cell block slammed shut with a deafening, synchronized clang. Nadia stood perfectly still in the blood-red light, looking at Landon, whose face was completely frozen in absolute terror. The fail-safe has been engaged, Nadia stated, her voice echoing in the trapped, darkened room. The case has just transmitted a distress beacon directly to the National Military Command Center. It has designated this coordinates as a hostile terrorist environment. Landon dropped the flashlight. It rolled away into the darkness. What? What did you do? I did nothing, Deputy, Nadia replied, turning her chilling gaze toward him. You just declared war on the Pentagon. And they have exactly 15 minutes to respond before the asset self-destructs and takes a 3-block radius with it. Panic erupted inside the Oak Haven precinct like a match thrown into gasoline. Jolene was sobbing hysterically behind the bulletproof glass of the dispatcher's desk. The local reporter was frantically banging on the magnetically sealed front doors, completely trapped. Mayor Anastasia Thorne was hyperventilating, her pristine political composure entirely shattered. Only two people in the room remained calm, Nadia Fleetwood and the rookie, Soren. Quiet. Soren bellowed, his voice suddenly dropping its nervous tremor, taking on the harsh, authoritative bark of a seasoned combat veteran. The military training had finally overridden his fear of his training officer. Everyone shut up and step away from the device. Landon backed away from the pulsing red briefcase as if it were a venomous snake. He looked at his hands, trembling violently. It's a trick. It's a bomb. She's a terrorist. Soren, shoot her. Neutralize the threat. Soren didn't reach for his gun. Instead, he unclipped a set of handcuff keys from his belt, walked directly over to Nadia, and unlocked her wrists. "What are you doing?" Landon screamed. "That's an order, rookie." Soren ignored him. He looked Nadia directly in the eyes, taking in her posture, the way she tracked the room, and the unmistakable aura of command. He snapped to rigid attention and executed a textbook military salute. "Specialist Soren Davis, 716th Military Police Battalion, ma'am," he said, his voice steady. "What are your orders?" Nadia rubbed her raw wrists, offering the young man a single, approving nod. "Stand down, specialist. You did well. Secure the mayor and your training officer. Make sure they do not touch that case again." "Ma'am." "Yes, ma'am." Soren turned, placing his hand firmly on his holstered weapon, glaring at Landon. "You move an inch, Landon, and I will put you on the floor." Nadia walked over to the booking desk. The red light from the briefcase painted her face in sinister, bloody hues. "Mayor Thorne. The phone on that desk. It runs on a hard line, correct?" Anastasia, trembling so hard she could barely stand, nodded weakly. "Yes, it's copper wire. Old system." "Good." The electromagnetic pulse from the case jammed all cellular signals in the building. Nadia picked up the heavy black receiver. She didn't dial 911. She dialed a 12-digit alphanumeric sequence on the keypad, routing the call through an encrypted DoD satellite uplink. It rang exactly half a time before it was picked up. Director Fleetwood, the icy, hyper-efficient voice of Colette Storm, the Undersecretary of Defense, echoed through the receiver. Colette didn't ask how Nadia was. She didn't ask about her weekend. "We are tracking a broken Shield Class 1 asset breach at your exact coordinates. I am looking at a satellite feed of a civilian police station." Confirming Class 1 breach, Undersecretary, Nadia said, her voice projecting through the silent, terrified precinct so every person in the room could hear her. "Asset was confiscated during an unlawful detention by local law enforcement. Deputy Badge 447 initiated blunt force trauma to the biometric lock. The localized defense matrix is armed and counting down." On the other end of the line, deep within the Pentagon's subterranean command center, Colette Storm closed her eyes. She imagined the sheer, unfathomable stupidity of a local cop hitting a nuclear football with a flashlight. "Understood, Director," Colette said, her fingers flying across a glowing tactical keyboard. "The President has been notified. We have scrambled 2 F-22 Raptors from Andrews. They will be over your airspace in 4 minutes. I am deploying the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. They are wheels up in a Blackhawk, ETA 11 minutes. Landon dropped to his knees. F-22 Raptors? Delta Force? He couldn't breathe. The air felt thin. He had pulled over a black woman in a beat-up truck to make himself feel powerful. He had accidentally held the nation's nuclear command infrastructure hostage. "General," Colette continued, her voice turning grim, "what is the status of the hostile combatants?" Nadia looked down at Landon, who was now weeping silently on the linoleum floor, his arrogance entirely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, broken shell of a man. She looked at Mayor Thorne, who realized her political career, and possibly her life, was about to end in federal prison for harboring a national security threat. "The hostiles have been neutralized by their own incompetence. Storm," Nadia said coldly. "Do not initiate a kinetic strike on the building. Have Delta breach the roof, secure the asset, and prepare federal marshals to take custody of the local police force. I want them charged with domestic terrorism, grand theft of classified materials, and treason." "Copy that, General. See you in 11 minutes." storm out. Nadia hung up the phone. The high-pitched whine of the briefcase continued, a terrifying countdown to a federal invasion. She turned to Landon, walking slowly until she stood directly over his kneeling, trembling form. "I told you," Nadia whispered, the red light flashing rhythmically across her face. "You were making a catastrophic error." Suddenly, the deafening, earth-shaking roar of twin military jet engines shattered the quiet of the affluent Oakhaven neighborhood, rattling the bulletproof glass of the precinct. The Raptors had arrived, circling like vultures, over Deputy Landon's ruined kingdom. The Oakhaven police precinct had been built to project suburban safety, but under the deafening, earth-rattling roar of twin F-22 Raptors, the brick and glass structure felt like a fragile dollhouse about to be crushed. The jets didn't just fly over. They established a low-altitude holding pattern, executing a textbook show of force maneuver. The sheer acoustic violence of the military-grade engines vibrated the precinct's reinforced windows so violently that hairline fractures began to spiderweb across the bulletproof glass. Dust from the ceiling tiles rained down onto the pristine linoleum. Inside the magnetically sealed lobby, bathed in the sinister, rhythmic, crimson pulsing of the Tier 1 biometric briefcase, the air was thick with unfiltered terror. Deputy Landon was on his hands and knees, clutching his head as the roar of the jets washed over the building. His chest heaved with ragged, panicked gasps. The man who, mere minutes ago, had swaggered through the station like an untouchable king, was now completely paralyzed by the realization that he had summoned the full, wrathful might of the United States Armed Forces. "They're going to bomb us." Jolene, the dispatcher, shrieked from beneath her desk, her hands clamped desperately over her ears. "We're all going to die." "Nobody is bombing the building," Nadia Fleetwood stated. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a resonant, cutting clarity that sliced right through the mechanical whine of the briefcase and the jet wash outside. She stood by the booking desk, perfectly composed, hands resting comfortably at her sides. "Those jets are maintaining air superiority to ensure no unauthorized aircraft enter the airspace during the extraction. The real breach is coming from the ground." Mayor Anastasia Thorne, her designer suit now smeared with drywall dust, scrambled backward until her back hit the solid brick wall. Her political instincts, usually razor-sharp, were short-circuiting. "General Fleetwood," she stammered, finally using the title. "Please, you have to stop this. If the press outside sees, if my constituents—" Nadia turned her dark, unyielding gaze toward the mayor. "Your constituents are currently watching federal warplanes circle their neighborhood because your deputy decided his badge gave him the right to assault a black woman and smash a classified defense asset with a flashlight. You built a department on corruption and zero accountability. Mayor Thorne, now you get to pay the invoice." Before Anastasia could formulate a response, a new sound began to overlay the roar of the jets. It was a deep, rhythmic, concussive thwack 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 that seemed to punch directly into their chests. "Black Hawk," Specialist Soren whispered, his eyes going wide. He instinctively stepped in front of Nadia, a protective posture ingrained from his tours overseas, though he knew she was the most dangerous person in the room. Shadows eclipsed the moonlight coming through the lobby skylights. The sheer downdraft of the MH-60 Black Hawk helicopter violently rattled the precinct's roof, shaking loose more debris. It was hovering just feet above the building. "Soren," Nadia commanded calmly. "Tell everyone to get away from the main entrance and cover their eyes. Now, everyone back. Get back from the doors. Cover your eyes." Soren bellowed, dragging the catatonic Landon away from the blast radius by the collar of his tactical vest. 3 seconds later, the world exploded. A localized, precisely calculated breaching charge detonated on the reinforced magnetic deadbolts of the precinct's front doors. The explosion was blindingly white, instantly followed by a concussive shockwave that blew the heavy glass doors completely off their hinges. The doors sailed inward, crashing violently against the reception desk and showering the room in 1,000 glittering shards of tempered glass. Through the thick, acrid smoke of the breaching charge stepped 6 figures. They did not look like police officers. They were ghosts in the machine, operators from the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. They wore full matte black tactical gear, quad-tube panoramic night vision goggles pulled down over their faces, and suppressed Mk-18 assault rifles locked tightly into their shoulders. Moving with a synchronized, fluid lethality that defied human instinct, they flowed into the room. Dozens of blindingly bright tactical flashlights and the red dots of laser sights instantly crisscrossed the smoky lobby, pinning Landon, Anastasia, and Jolene to the floor. "Federal agents! On the ground! Do not move!" A voice boomed, digitally amplified through a helmet speaker. It was a voice that brokered absolutely no negotiation. Landon pressed his face into the dirty linoleum, sobbing openly, a dark stain spreading across the front of his uniform trousers. The local bully was thoroughly, absolutely broken. Two Delta operators immediately flanked the front doors, setting up a defensive perimeter. Three others fanned out, sweeping the holding cells and the back offices in mere seconds. The team leader, a towering man with the call sign Reaper stenciled on his tactical vest, marched directly toward the booking desk. His rifle was lowered, but his posture was coiled tight. He bypassed the weeping deputy, bypassed the terrified mayor, and stopped directly in front of Nadia Fleetwood. To the absolute shock of Soren and the civilians on the floor, the towering Delta Force operator snapped his rifle against his chest and offered a crisp, flawless salute. "General Fleetwood, area secure, ma'am," Reaper reported, his voice tight with adrenaline but laced with profound respect. "We have the perimeter locked down. What is your status?" Nadia returned the salute with sharp precision. "Status is green, Captain. I am uninjured. However, the Vanguard asset has been critically compromised. It requires immediate biometric stabilization before the secondary failsafe detonates." Reaper turned his night vision goggles toward the pulsing red briefcase on the desk. "Understood, ma'am. Moving to stabilize." Captain Reaper approached the titanium briefcase with the extreme caution of a man handling a live explosive. The high-pitched mechanical whine was still echoing through the lobby, vibrating in everyone's teeth. The glass biometric scanner was completely shattered where Landon had struck it with his heavy metal flashlight. From a pouch on his tactical vest, Reaper produced a small, ruggedized military tablet. He connected a localized fiber optic cable from the tablet to a hidden, recessed port on the underside of the briefcase's handle, a port only known to Tier 1 personnel. "Initiating handshake sequence," Reaper muttered, his thick fingers flying across the tablet's screen. "General, I need your retinal scan to override the physical damage to the primary scanner." Nadia stepped forward. Reaper held up a small optical scanner attached to his tablet. Nadia stared into the device without blinking. A soft blue beam washed over her right eye. "Beep. Retinal match confirmed. General Nadia Fleetwood, Director of Domestic Strategic Defense," the tablet's automated voice announced, crisp and loud. "Entering the abort codes," Reaper said. He typed a complex 16-digit alphanumeric sequence into the tablet. He paused, looking at the blinking red light. "Execute." The precinct held its collective breath. For 2 agonizing seconds, the briefcase continued to pulse. Then, the horrific mechanical whine sputtered and died. The angry red LED light turned a solid, calming blue. The heavy, suffocating weight of the countdown lifted from the room. "Asset stabilized, General. The failsafe is disarmed," Reaper confirmed, unhooking his tablet and slinging his rifle onto his back. He carefully picked up the heavy titanium case, holding it against his chest. Nadia let out a slow, controlled exhale. "Excellent work, Captain. Have your men establish a hard perimeter around this building. Nobody enters or leaves without my direct authorization." "Yes, ma'am." Reaper signaled 2 of his operators, who immediately moved to secure the destroyed front entrance. Now that the immediate threat of a localized detonation was neutralized, the reality of the situation began to settle over the local cops. The emergency backup lights flickered on, illuminating the dust-choked lobby and the terrifying presence of the Delta operators. Mayor Anastasia Thorne pushed herself up into a sitting position. Her perfect blowout was ruined, her face pale beneath her makeup. She looked at the general, then at the Delta operators, and her political survival instincts finally kicked back in. She tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "General Fleetwood," Anastasia said, her voice shaking but attempting to project authority. She slowly stood up, brushing the dirt off her skirt. "I must protest this heavy-handed military intervention. I am the elected mayor of Oak Haven. This is a civilian police precinct. You have no jurisdiction here to blow off our doors and terrorize my staff." Nadia didn't yell. She didn't have to. She simply turned her head, fixing the mayor with a look so cold it could have frozen the blood in her veins. "Mayor Thorne," Nadia said softly, closing the distance between them until she was standing inches from the politician. "When a domestic law enforcement officer unlawfully detains a high-ranking military official, confiscates a Tier 1 nuclear command asset, and then attempts to destroy that asset with a blunt instrument, civilian jurisdiction evaporates. This precinct is now officially classified as a federal crime scene under the purview of the Patriot Act and the Department of Defense." Anastasia swallowed hard, shrinking back against the wall. Landon acted alone. "I had no idea. Do not insult my intelligence." Nadia cut her off, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I have read the DOJ civil rights complaints filed against this department over the last 4 years. Complaints you personally buried to protect property values. You fostered a culture of impunity. You hired deputies like Landon because they kept undesirables out of your wealthy zip code. You are not a victim here, Mayor. You are the architect." On the floor, Landon groaned. He was still face down, his hands restrained behind his back by thick, military-grade zip ties applied by one of the Delta operators. "I didn't know." Landon cried out, his voice pathetic and nasal. "She looked like a thug. She was wearing dirty coveralls and driving a junk truck. How was I supposed to know she was a general? It was a mistake." Nadia walked over to Landon, looking down at him as one might look at a venomous insect. "A mistake is misreading a license plate, Deputy," Nadia said, her voice echoing in the quiet lobby. "What you did was profiling. What you did was an escalation of force based entirely on your own racial bias and fragile ego. You didn't care who I was. You only cared that I didn't fit your narrow, prejudiced view of who belongs in this town. And because of that, you nearly triggered a national security catastrophe." Nadia turned her attention back to Reaper. "Captain, what is the ETA on the federal marshals?" Reaper checked his tactical watch. "The FBI and U.S. Marshal Service are 2 minutes out. General, they are bringing a full convoy." "Good," Nadia said. She looked back down at Landon, who was weeping into the linoleum. "Deputy Landon, you are currently under military detention for the assault of a federal officer, grand theft of classified government property, and attempting to trigger a weapon of mass destruction. When the marshals arrive, I am handing you over to them. You will never wear a badge again. You will never see a pension, and you will spend the rest of your natural life in a federal supermax facility." Landon wailed, a terrible, guttural sound of a man realizing his entire life was over. 2 minutes later, a convoy of 12 blacked-out SUVs and 2 armored mobile command centers roared up to the front of the ruined precinct, their red and blue lights painting the manicured lawns of Oak Haven. The cavalry had arrived to clean up the mess. Dozens of FBI agents in windbreakers and heavily armed U.S. Marshals poured out of the vehicles, immediately integrating with the Delta Force perimeter. The quiet, affluent town of Oak Haven was awake now. Residents in silk pajamas and expensive robes were standing on their porches, holding up their smartphones, filming the absolute spectacle of their local police station being occupied by the federal government. A tall, sharp-featured woman in a pristine navy suit strode through the shattered glass doors of the precinct. It was Colette Storm, the Undersecretary of Defense. She had flown in directly from D.C. on a priority transport. Colette surveyed the wreckage, the blown doors, the dust, the Delta operators standing guard, and the local police force zip-tied on the floor. Her eyes finally landed on Nadia. "General Fleetwood," Colette said, a rare, grim smile touching her lips. "I see you've had an eventful Saturday afternoon." "Undersecretary," Nadia replied, gesturing to the chaos. "I apologize for the mess, but I believe we have successfully identified a critical weakness in our domestic security infrastructure." Colette looked down at Landon, who was now being hauled to his feet by 2 massive U.S. Marshals. "Is this the architect of our near destruction?" "That is Deputy Landon," Nadia said evenly. "He likes to search vehicles without warrants and play with classified hardware. Landon, his face bruised and streaked with tears, looked at the Undersecretary of Defense, then at the FBI agents, and finally at Nadia. The sheer scale of the power structure arrayed against him finally crushed whatever defiance he had left. "Please," Landon begged, his voice cracking. He looked at Soren, who was standing quietly near the dispatch desk. "Soren, tell them. Tell them I was just following protocol. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Soren, the young rookie who had risked his own career to unlock Nadia's handcuffs, stepped forward. He looked his former training officer dead in the eye. "You didn't follow protocol, Landon," Soren said, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. "You profiled her. You escalated without cause. You physically assaulted her, and then you tried to destroy evidence when you realized you were wrong. I saw the whole thing, and I will testify to every single detail under federal oath." Landon's head dropped to his chest. He was done. "Get him out of my sight," Colette ordered the marshals. As the marshals dragged Landon toward the shattered doors, Nadia spoke up. "Hold." The marshals stopped. Nadia walked up to Landon. She reached out and, with a swift, powerful yank, ripped the silver Oakhaven police badge from his uniform shirt. "You are unworthy of this shield," Nadia said, dropping the badge onto the dust-covered floor and crushing it beneath the heel of her boot. "Take him away." Landon was dragged out into the flashing lights of the convoy, paraded right in front of the local news cameras that Mayor Anastasia had so desperately wanted earlier. The irony was absolute. Next, the FBI agents moved in on Mayor Thorne. "Anastasia Thorne, you are under arrest for federal conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violations of the Civil Rights Act," a senior FBI agent stated, slapping a pair of heavy steel cuffs onto her wrists. "You can't do this. I know the governor." Anastasia shrieked as she was led away, her political empire crumbling to ash in front of her eyes. As the precinct was cleared of the corrupt officials, Nadia turned to Soren. The young specialist was standing at parade rest, awaiting orders. "Specialist Davis," Nadia said, her tone softening slightly. "You acted with honor today. You remembered your training, and you chose to protect the innocent over protecting the thin blue line. That takes courage." "Thank you, ma'am," Soren said, swallowing hard. "I just did what was right. And that is exactly why I need you," Nadia said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek, black business card with a single gold emblem on it. She handed it to Soren. "The Domestic Strategic Defense Command is currently recruiting operators who understand tactical de-escalation and possess a strong moral compass. When this federal investigation is over, call this number. You belong with us, not writing traffic tickets for corrupt politicians." Soren looked at the card, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming gratitude. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Yes, ma'am." Nadia turned back to Undersecretary Storm. The heavy titanium briefcase was securely in Captain Reaper's hands. The threat was over. "Come on, General," Colette said, gesturing toward the door. "I believe you have a vintage Ford pickup truck that needs some engine work. Let's get you home." Nadia Fleetwood walked out of the shattered precinct, her head held high, the red and blue lights of the federal convoy reflecting off the grease stains on her coveralls. She had come to Oakhaven looking for a quiet weekend. Instead, she had cleaned house. The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility ADX Florence was a concrete tomb designed for the most dangerous terrorists on the planet. For the past 72 hours, it had been the new, terrifying home of former Deputy Landon. Landon sat in his 7 by 12-foot cell, his knees pulled tightly to his chest. He was no longer the apex predator of Oakhaven. He was inmate 88419-054. Without his badge and his gun, he was nothing but a frightened, broken man. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blinding red flash of the Tier 1 briefcase. Every time he drifted towards sleep, the deafening roar of the F-22 Raptors rattled his skull. 2,000 miles away, General Nadia Fleetwood was experiencing a very different kind of silence. She smoothly rolled out from beneath the chassis of her 1969 Ford F-100 pickup, grabbing a red shop rag to wipe the motor oil from her hands. Undersecretary of Defense Colette Storm was standing in her driveway, flanked by diplomatic security agents. She held out a thick, sealed manila folder. The Department of Justice has officially dissolved Oak Haven's police force, Colette announced, stepping into the shade of the garage. Mayor Thorne is taking a plea deal to avoid a life sentence. Landon, however, is having his public defender try to claim qualified immunity. Colette let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The federal judge nearly threw the lawyer in jail just for suggesting it. When you smash a nuclear command asset, qualified immunity evaporates. The federal tribunal begins tomorrow at 0800 in D.C. They need your testimony to formally seal the coffin. Nadia tossed the folder onto her workbench. I've spent 30 years fighting monsters across the globe, she said quietly. I never expected to find one wearing a badge 3 miles from my home. But a threat to the Constitution is a threat, no matter what uniform it wears. We have a chopper waiting. Will you be wearing your stars, General? Colette asked. Nadia's eyes hardened into the obsidian stare of a commander going into battle. Yes. I want him to see exactly who he tried to break. The federal district court in Washington, D.C. was cold, imposing, and entirely devoid of mercy. Landon sat at the defense table, a trembling husk wrapped in the bright orange jumpsuit of a maximum security inmate. His wrists and ankles were bound by heavy chains. Beside him sat a visibly sweating public defender. Landon's police union had immediately severed all ties the moment the words Delta Force hit the press. Specialist Soren Davis was the first to take the stand. Wearing a crisp charcoal suit, Soren dismantled Landon's entire existence with military precision. He testified to the lack of probable cause, the blatant racial profiling, the unprovoked assault, and Landon's malicious attempt to destroy the classified briefcase. Landon's defense attorney didn't even attempt a cross-examination. The government calls its final witness, the prosecutor announced. Director of the Domestic Strategic Defense Command, General Nadia Fleetwood. The heavy oak doors swung open. General Nadia Fleetwood marched down the center aisle in her full Army service uniform. 4 silver stars gleamed blindingly bright on her shoulders. In her chest was a solid wall of valor medals. The silence in the room was absolute. She took the stand, locking her dark eyes directly onto Landon. He physically recoiled, pressing himself against his chair as his chains rattled loudly in the quiet room. General, what occurred when the defendant struck the Project Vanguard vault? The prosecutor asked gently. The asset registered a hostile, unauthorized breach attempt, Nadia stated, her resonant voice echoing effortlessly. It engaged the broken shield protocol, jamming all local communications and transmitting a distress signal to the Pentagon, which designated the precinct as a hostile terror environment. Why did the defendant target you, General? Nadia stared at the weeping, broken man across the room. He targeted me because he saw a black woman in a vintage truck. He did not see a citizen with rights. He saw an opportunity to exercise cruelty under the shield of his badge. He is a coward who mistook a uniform for absolute power. The defense attorney immediately rested his case. There was nothing left to attack. The sentencing phase took less than 20 minutes. The evidence was insurmountable. The political pressure from the Pentagon and the White House was absolute. Judge Marcus Vance stood up, his black robes billowing around him, and looked down at Landon, who was forced to stand by the bailiffs. Deputy Landon, Judge Vance's voice, echoed with the finality of a closing tomb. You were entrusted with the sacred duty of protecting the public. Instead, you used your authority to terrorize them. You let your bigotry guide your actions, and in your staggering arrogance, you nearly triggered a localized military catastrophe that would have cost countless innocent lives. Landon swayed on his feet. I'm sorry, he whispered, a broken, pathetic croak. I'm so sorry. Your apologies are entirely insufficient to the scale of your crimes. Judge Vance fired back, striking his gavel against the sounding block. On the charges of civil rights violations, assault, and grand theft, I sentence you to 20 years. On the charge of attempting to trigger a weapon of mass destruction under the Patriot Act, I sentence you to life in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. You are remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court has none. Landon let out a blood-curdling scream of pure despair as the marshals grabbed his arms and hauled him backward. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, cutting off his cries. The bully of Oak Haven was gone forever. erased from society by the very machine he had foolishly attempted to challenge. Mayor Anastasia Thorne, watching from the gallery, buried her face in her hands. Her plea deal had been accepted, but she was still going to spend the next 2 decades in a federal prison, her legacy completely destroyed. 3 months later, deep beneath the Pentagon, in the highly classified subterranean levels, the doors to an elevator slid silently open. Soren stepped out. He was no longer wearing the cheap polyester uniform of a local cop, nor the sharp suit of a court witness. He was dressed in the sleek, tactical black uniform of a federal agent, a subtle gold badge pinned to his belt. He walked down a long, brightly lit corridor lined with armed guards and biometric scanners. The air hummed with the quiet, terrifying energy of servers processing global data. This was the nerve center of the Domestic Strategic Defense Command. At the end of the hall, a set of heavy steel doors parted automatically. Soren stepped into a massive command center. Dozens of analysts sat at glowing terminals, monitoring digital maps of the United States. Standing at the front of the room, looking at a massive digital display, was General Nadia Fleetwood. She wore her dark blue uniform, her hands clasped behind her back in her signature parade rest posture. Soren approached, stopping a respectful distance away, and snapped a crisp salute. "Agent Davis reporting for duty, General," Soren said, pride swelling in his chest. Nadia turned, returning the salute with a slight, approving smile. "At ease, Agent Davis. Welcome to DSDC." She gestured toward the massive map of the country, where thousands of green dots pulsed steadily, representing secure locations and stabilized infrastructure. "The local police force in Oak Haven has been completely dissolved and replaced by a federally overseen county task force," Nadia said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Property values plummeted, but the crime rate hasn't changed. Turns out, the town didn't need a bully to keep it safe. It just needed the truth." Soren looked at the map, then back at the general. "I still can't believe I'm here, ma'am. After everything that happened, after what Landon did." "You are here, Soren, because of what you did," Nadia corrected him gently. "Landon thought power was a weapon used to crush the weak. You understood that true power is a shield used to protect them. The badge on your belt doesn't give you the right to rule. It gives you the obligation to serve." She reached out, resting a hand on Soren's shoulder. It was a gesture of immense trust and leadership. "The shield was broken in Oak Haven, Soren," Nadia said softly, looking out over the command center. "Your job now is to help me reforge it. We are the new watchdogs, and we do not look away." "Yes, General," Soren replied, his voice filled with unwavering resolve. "We do not look away." Nadia turned back to the glowing monitors, the weight of the nation resting comfortably on her shoulders. The battle in Oak Haven was over, but the war for justice was eternal. And she was exactly where she belonged, standing on the front lines, absolute and unyielding. And that, my friends, is how you deliver absolute, inescapable karma. Deputy Landon thought his badge made him an untouchable king, but he ended up learning the hardest lesson of his life inside a federal supermax cell for the rest of his days. Meanwhile, true honor was rewarded, and General Fleetwood proved that real power isn't about volume or violence, it's about discipline, intelligence, and holding the line for justice. The system may be broken in places, but when the right people step up to reforge the shield, the bullies of the world don't stand a chance. What was your favorite moment from this explosive story? Did Landon get exactly what he deserved in that courtroom? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you felt the sweet satisfaction of this instant karma, be sure to smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more epic stories where the bad guys get completely humbled. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.